The sound, basically, the opening theme gives away what we're going to be discussing today. It's almost inevitable when you hear this kind of introduction. But today we have a really important guest to discuss everything about yesterday's Congressional hearing on UAPs, as they call them today. They don't like them to call them UFOs anymore. I'm going to actually ask Don about that too. But Donald R. Schmitt, I mean, this guy is a legend in UFO circles. He is the author of this book, which came out also in the 75th anniversary edition. I have the pleasure and the honor to call him my friend. He was interviewed also not so long ago by News Nation during his yearly Roswell event. He's one of the curators of the museum over there. He is the former co-director of the J. Allen Hynek Center. And I have to ask better how you pronounce this, Hynek, but I'm going to ask Donald, of course. And so you are tuning in now on Facebook, YouTube. In the coming hours, Ban.video will also relay this video all over the internet. And I can only say welcome to my friend, Don. Don!
Leo, my friend.
Yeah, you are too small. We have to enlarge you.
There we go.
That's it. That's much better. That's much better. Okay, Don. Thank you for joining me in such an important and historical day, because it's the day after. It's the day after something really important happened. Yes. We're going to be discussing all this. Can you introduce yourself to my friends here who maybe have never heard about you, even if I doubt it, because nowadays you even go on News Nation. So you are becoming really mega popular all over the world.
I've done a lot more than News Nation through the years, but it was just...
Of course, I'm talking about, though, a clue moment, as you know, I think in the whole UFO WAP history. Isn't that the case, Don?
Yes. And the fact that this is becoming daily, the topic of conversation in not only the office space, but even in conversation where it would never even come up before, that people, I went to Sunday Mass, and the parish priest came up to me and said, "I just saw you on television. I had no idea." And it's like, well, I like my privacy. But he said, "We need to talk." And I've had that with many members of the clergy of all denominations, even, the Jewish faith, and other religions throughout the years, and even Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York, we've talked about UFOs. So it's something that it crosses all professions, all barriers of interest, but nonetheless, it still comes back to, are we dealing with something extraterrestrial? Are we dealing with something of a super technology that remains top secret, as the military in keeping its secrets, especially from our enemies? Or are we dealing with something more interdimensional, something that is right here with us, and it's able to slip in and out at will? And, Leo, for every time we've talked, and I've always, drilled as far as on the notion that my scientific director, my teacher, my mentor, who I worked for 8 years, and that was Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And he was the consultant.
Hynek, that's the pronunciation.
Czechoslovakian. So and Hynek. And the Close Encounters movie, that was his movie with Steven Spielberg. He was consultant to the Air Force Project Blue Book for 20 years. So the foremost authority on the subject. And I would tell you, Leo, how the last time I had dinner with Hynek, and as an astronomer, he just could not grasp. He couldn't, even entertain the idea that physical craft were traversing, were able to travel from point A to B, that our own galaxy was so vast, so distant, that it was physically impossible. He just, even at the speed of light, it would still take years to get here. And what makes us so interesting? So I have long entertained the possibility that we're dealing with something much closer. We're dealing with something of another dimension. We're dealing with something that is able to slip into our realm of existence at will. Just as easy for them to slip out. But nonetheless, we see it, we hear it, we track it on radar, and then it's gone. And so it's a question of what is behind this existence, this other plane of existence. Is it of a malevolent or benevolent intent? Is it something that would wish us well, or is it somehow infiltrating and slowly taking over the highest echelons of society? And we're seeing the end results now with the implosion, with all the problems that are happening throughout the world. One could hardly suggest that they're space brothers, so to speak, that they're helping us, that they're guiding us, that they're teaching us to overcome our insecurities and to become part of the galactic neighborhood, so to speak. And so it's something that my colleagues, we've often referred to them almost like tricksters, as though they're having
the promise of a new golden age, which then becomes very popular with all the new age people, and it's like, they're coming to save us.
It's how it entices us. It's how it captivates us. It lures us into their acceptance, and then they spring the trap. I've had colleagues for years refer to them, as I mentioned, the great tricksters. The idea that they're having this laugh as far as on our account, and as the famous philosopher Carl Jung would suggest, that maybe we're dealing with planet Earth as the universal insane asylum, or we're the galactic zoo, so to speak.
But I want to actually, as you mentioned, Carl Gustav Jung, and then you projected us in the early 50s when it was really all happening in that moment after Roswell, and so there was a lot of interest, and suddenly the question was given also to Fermi, the famous physicist
yes.
who worked, of course, on the nuclear bomb.
Manhattan Project, correct.
Yes, on the Manhattan Project. And the question was about the UFOs, And so finally we have the birth of the so-called Fermi paradox. But I was thinking, as we know, your dear friend, we talked about it many times. I know him also very well. I have the pleasure and the honor of actually having even done politics with him, Roberto Pinotti. Yes. When David Grish came out with his revelations, he talked about the 1933 crash in Italy being the first UFO crash. And that was the moment in which Fermi was still working for Mussolini in Italy. Now, it's literally impossible that he wasn't involved in the whole thing. And today we're going to be discussing a little bit about that UFO crash. So the Fermi paradox sounds like the Fermi hoax.
Yes, if we accept that there indeed was a crash back in 33, as far as at the time of Mussolini, and that the craft, the physical evidence, would have been turned over to the Allies at the end of World War II in 1945. And even the rumors at that time was that it came here to the States, and that it originally went to Wright-Patterson in Dayton, Ohio. And what a coincidence that that's exactly where the Roswell wreckage and the remains went in July of 1947. So all roads lead to Wright-Patterson in Dayton, Ohio, so to speak. An 8-year predecessor to Area 51, where people still, like to believe that we're reverse engineering alien technology after all this time. And yet, here we are.
In fact, in Volume 7, I talk about in the 1950s reverse engineering to create artificial intelligence. So now the there is a lot of things that I want to ask you, because, of course, I have made this book for me is an incredible amount, a treasure like all your work, Don. But I decided to open with a specific citation, chapter 6 of my latest book, which is just out now on Kindle. It will be out soon on paperback. I'm talking about volume 9 of my Confessions, in which in chapter 6, which is entitled Cyber Satan's Aliens Origins and the Frightening Answer to the Fermi Paradox, which you just cited, Fermi, regarding Enrico Fermi, for those who don't know him, I made this exact citation from your book, and I will read it to you quickly because I think it's very important, gives us an idea. Those who refuse to look at the evidence will never acknowledge it exists. Right. Others suggest the case is ancient history, as all the witnesses have now passed on. Right. But if we are to accept the massive amount of testimony that suggests that a craft and bodies of unknown origin were indeed recovered, such secluded evidence will outlast all of us, no matter where all such proof is hidden or carted away by those who will prevent the truth from seeing the light of day. It still exists. Something extraordinary crashed, was recovered, and then was sent on for testing and analysis. That is a fundamental historical fact. Thomas J. Carey and Donald R. Schmitt from the Witness to Roswell 75th Anniversary Edition. Please. Tom.
Yes. And the point that I always make, Leo, is that the government / the military, they made that announcement. They made that claim on July 8th, 1947, that they had actually captured a flying saucer. We didn't make that. The witnesses didn't make that. The government did. And to what ends? That they would then recant, they would retract that within 5 hours, and state sorry, made a mistake, that the very men who were in charge of the atomic bomb, the first atomic bomb wing in the world at that time, couldn't identify a very off-the-shelf common weather balloon device of rubber and foil and wooden sticks and string and tape, off-the-shelf material which any 5-year-old child would have recognized. So we are still to this day to believe that the people who were in charge of the atomic bomb were that incompetent, were that ill-trained, that they didn't even recognize the very balloons that they themselves were launching on a day-to-day basis in conjunction with their bomb drop exercises. They were launching these balloons as they were flying their B-29 bombers and training in the event that they would once again have to drop an atomic bomb. So they stayed at the ready. That's one of the reasons that all the personnel at that base in Roswell in 1947, they were on constant standby, because we didn't know if measures would need to be taken as far as with the then escalating Cold War with the Soviet Union. And we still didn't know that much of the stolen or recovered German Nazi technology, that somebody else would also develop their own atomic bomb. We knew that, and that's what comes out in the Oppenheimer movie. The fact that we weren't racing with the Russians during, as far as that last year of World War II, we were racing with the Germans, because it was all those German scientists that, as a result of our realizing that they were that far advanced, they were that far ahead of us, that we needed to use them in the development of our own super weapon, that Germany was on the cusp as well.
In fact, Don, it's interesting that you brought this up, apart from the connection between Enrico Fermi, of course, and Oppenheimer. But in volume 7, I talk about the fact that the family of Klaus Schwab, his father, was involved in building those turbines for the heavy water that eventually was sabotaged in Norway. Actually, I met one of those guys who was involved because I was living in Norway for many years, and I went to his conference once. And so what happened? And I remember also one of the things he said about nuclear weapons then reaching countries like, Israel or South Africa or whatever. But then if you go and read in my book, I write about the fact that it was Klaus Schwab's father, and then Klaus Schwab in the early years when he worked for his family's company, that facilitated the expansion also of the nuclear bomb in various other countries. Yes. And of course, if the father was a Nazi, was awarded by the Nazis, his factory was using all of people who were victims of the Holocaust, people from the concentration camps. And now we have Klaus Schwab in charge of the Fourth Reich and the Great Reset with Prince Charles, who, by the way, is a Hanoverian king, because yes, he is British, but let's not forget that he's also German. And all this, of course, brings us also to the various hypotheses that connect also the technology that eventually was also in some way given to the Nazis to build these early forms of UFOs. Have you ever encountered any evidence of that, or what you think about that hypothesis? Because of course we know that around the whole Nazi occult esoteric, there is also a lot of legends that they're not really concrete.
As we investigated alternative explanations to Roswell, and as America had recovered a good number of the German V-2 rockets that were then tested, many of them failed to launch at the White Sands Proving Grounds, just 2 hours west of Roswell, north of Alamogordo, New Mexico. And we would even question rocket experts there about the German A9 rocket. And it was to be a two-stage rocket. The intent at that time, the design was that...
I mean, the fact that they were so close to Roswell testing these remains of what they found in their Nazi... Is it a coincidence?
That, and the fact that as they finally revealed, and we knew about it for decades, we knew about Operation Paperclip. We knew that they brought over.
But in fact, what do you think then of the hypothesis of Annie Jacobsen?
No, not even close. In fact, even her.
Because I always thought that her hypothesis, I mean, her work seems to be very thorough, especially with Operation Paperclip is okay. But with Area 51, she seems to really make some outrageous claims about.
And we're totally refuted by us from the very beginning. The idea and her theory from her lone source, who recanted, who later would say on ABC Nightline that he was just trying to help her sell books. That was the reason for his story. But the story was that the Russians had recovered one of the flying wing prototypes by the famous Horton brothers, who had essentially tried to create the flying wing prototype. And one of the close advances was the ME-263, which was the Schmitt Comet, which was a wing-shaped rocket fighter. So the fact that the Germans were even experimenting with rocket aircraft at the final stages of World War II. And anyway, Jacobsen's source would claim that the Russians, in recovering one of those flying wings, and then for having captured Dr. Death, Dr. Joseph Mengele, and that he took 13-year-old children.
Yes, some freaks, a mix between midgets, dwarfs, and I don't know what kind of other freak.
Made them look alien, made them look as though they were non-human, and they were inside this flying wing, and that the Russians staged as far as this crash.
Now I think that somebody like Annie Jacobsen must feel like a fool after the last month of revelations of this latest hearing that we are discussing.
I mean, it's simple. Historically, first of all, there were no flying wings recovered by the Russians. There was one lone prototype that's presently at the Smithsonian Museum, and all it is tubular bicycle frame with varnished wood as far as the actual fuselage, So hardly a sophisticated aircraft that would fly from Russia to the United States back in 1947. But the biggest problem is Joseph Mengele was never captured by the Russians. He managed to escape to South America, like many of the Nazis
through
did.
that operation paperclip, let's say,
a
the
beautiful,
so-called rat lines,
yeah,
no? That
yeah.
also with the help of the Catholic Church, unfortunately,
Yes,
got a lot of
yes.
Nazis.
Exactly. We were in the FBI. We were cooperating with the Nazis down in South America because, again, we were then more concerned with the Soviet Union, and who better understood the rise of communism in Russia than the Germans, than the Nazis. So Mengele married a beautiful Brazilian woman on a beach in Argentina, and he lived out the rest of his life in South America. So Annie Jacobson, your story has no basis in historic reality, none whatsoever.
Let's get instead to this year. This year, it almost seems like this is a disclosure project in motion that has been really carefully orchestrated. When you start seeing people like the ones we saw yesterday, free military, one former intelligence, David Charles Grush, born in 1987, with a great CV, veteran and former member of this National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, but also involved with this organization that basically the Pentagon got to analyze this phenomenon, the UAP, as they call it now, phenomenon. So I want to ask you, of course, what you think of David Charles Grish. I don't know how you spell it. That's another Grash, I guess. And this whole work done by News Nation, which of course, that's why I cited News Nation at the beginning, because they are actually responsible with this Australian journalist Ross to have really amplified this whole thing. So are they part of this whole unfolding that is very carefully managed by the Pentagon? What is happening here? Because it's not every day that you have a guy with this kind of resume and background coming and revealing things like this, like the one that I'm going to show you now, which especially makes people a little bit wary when he talks about, of course, alien bodies even that have been retrieved by the government. So I wanted to, of course, go on the UFO hearing only for a minute or two, just so we can give also our spectators, our viewers, an idea of what we are talking about for those who have not, of course, been on this planet in the last 24 hours. Yesterday, we had the Congressional hearing on UAPs. That should have been the most important thing if it wasn't for that idiot of Hunter Biden and other things that, of course, distract us from... because, you know, they become distractions. So here, basically, we are, I think, almost two hours into the hearing, and we have this revelation, which, of course, I'm going to get this exact minute where he does this revelation, and then you can comment on it. And, of course, our viewers can also make their own minds up on what's all been all the fuss been about.
Video or the pictures that came out in the 2020 report that had the stuff off the East Coast. They were taken with an iPhone off the East Coast. A buddy of mine was one of the senior people there, and he said they were originally classified.
A little bit further here. Here we are. Just a second, so I find the right exact moment in which we can find the most important revelations. Here we should be going.
Activity been aggressive, been hostile in your reports?
I know of multiple colleagues of mine that got physically injured, and the activity. And I got
by UAPs or by people within the federal government?
Both.
Okay, so there has been activity by alien or non-human technology and or beings that has caused harm to humans.
I can't get into the specifics in an open environment, but at least the activity that I personally witnessed, and I have to be very careful here because you don't they tell you never to acknowledge tradecraft, right? So what I personally witnessed myself and my wife was very disturbing.
Okay. One of my constituents actually sent this next question, and I figured I'd ask it since I had the same thought. You've said that the U.S. has intact spacecraft. You said that the government has alien bodies or alien species. Have you seen the spacecraft?
I have to be careful to describe what I've seen firsthand and not in this environment, but I could answer that question behind closed doors. Yeah.
And have you seen any of the bodies?
That's something I've not witnessed myself.
Okay. And so with that being said,
we go back to our expert, who is the guest of the Leo Zagami show today, Donald R. Schmitt, directly from the Roswell Museum, the holy grail of ufology. Just so we mentioned something, a term you actually used in your book. You talk about something very interesting here at one point, a testimony also of somebody, a Native American Indian who was in the military at that time and who witnesses these bodies still alive. So, I mean, if you actually read Witness to Roswell, what has been said yesterday, there is nothing new about it, because it's all, I mean, even the fact that the Pentagon admits having UFO objects, of course, not from this planet or maybe from this dimension. We also will discuss further on also the interdimensional hypothesis. Please, Don.
See, let me state, I mean, and because we're dear friends, and I'm going to break a little news in that I've had colleagues, scientists who I work with very closely, who are now lamenting the fact, well, why aren't we being called? How come we weren't asked to testify? Why aren't we being consulted? And my standard answer is always, you have to be proactive. You just can't sit by the phone and expect people to come to you. You have to break ground. You have to knock on doors. You have to make things happen. And we have been, for example, in contact with Congressman Burchett's office from the beginning, as well as Congressman Gallagher. We will be working now in conjunction with Congressman Grothman, who is also part of the committee. So in other words, we're availing ourselves. Congressman Burchett already has told us, I've read all your books, Don. So it's interesting that everything is coming back to Roswell, and the fact that it was CBS 60 Minutes Australian journalist Ross Coulthard who interviewed as far as the whistleblower David Grudge. Okay. Now you know how Coulthard got involved in all this? He came to one of my lectures in Sydney 5 years ago.
I want to show this just so people have an idea. Pentagon admits it has UFO debris by Anthony McGee. I mean, and of course, another novelty for Don Schmitt, what was discussed yesterday at this incredible historic congressional hearing, that of course a lot of people will say, is it all a big psyop? And what are they pushing here, Don?
And there too, I keep pointing out that when we worked with the late Congressman Stephen Schiff of New Mexico, starting back in 1992, so it's now over 30 years ago, and we were working with him in Washington, pushing for congressional hearings specifically on Roswell, and not a single member, there wasn't anyone on Capitol Hill who stood with him. And he was stonewalled by the White House, by the Pentagon, by the Secretary of Defense. You name it, they told him basically, go away. We're not even going to consider your questions regarding this incident. But it forced them to come out with a third explanation on Roswell in 1994, and then a fourth one in 1997. So we're the ones who forced the Pentagon to come out with now 2 additional explanations to Roswell. They're presently up to 4. Fine. But this was almost like the revision of what we had started back in 1992. And now the pressure from us will be Roswell needs to have its day in court, because it's the one case that the members of the committee, all they would have to say is, we demand to see the bodies. I don't want to see any documents. I don't want to see any photographs. I don't want to see any report. That's, again, we're way past that.
Now, can I ask you, though, as as an expert, what did you think about the positioning of George Knapp here on the left from our perspective? And of course, this Jeremy Corbell on the other side.
Right.
It was all very picturesque, all very impressive, visual, but what's really hiding behind this kind of disclosure?
Well, and then we just had the recent supposed, encounter in Las Vegas.
Yeah. Actually, we can go maybe and show it to our viewers, for those who have maybe already forgot, because in 1 month, so many things happened, and it's in 2 months even more things happened. And
that's the problem. That's where you start to question how much of this is nothing but a distraction, as you mentioned. It hardly would be extraterrestrial, for the fact that, my God, it's like we're a parking lot. I mean, that we're having sightings every minute of every day around the world. And that's hardly suggestive of something traversing light years to get here. And as I said at the beginting of the program,
and get here and go to Las Vegas.
Yeah, well, you got to go to Las Vegas, right?
Let's see a moment.
It is the police call everybody will be talking about. Thanks for joining us here at 6 o'clock. I'm Denise Valdez.
I'm Brian Loftus. A family says something crashed into their backyard, prompting them to call 911, saying they saw creatures walking around.
Our 8 News Now investigators digging into this for weeks now. And tonight, our David Charnes with the video you will only see on 8 News Now. David?
Right, Denise, sources telling the 8 News Now investigators that several agencies believe something landed or crashed. Whether it was non-humans or not, it certainly scared the people living on this property. Now, before we show you that video, listen to their call for help.
There's like an 8-foot person beside it, and another one's inside, and it has big eyes and it's looking at us, and it's still there.
Okay, where is this on your property?
In my backyard. I swear to God, this is not a joke. This is actually, we're terrified of it.
So there's 2 people or 2 subjects that are in your backyard?
Correct, and they're very large. They're like 8 foot, 9 feet, 10 foot. I don't know. They look like aliens.
Don, I see your face. What's going on here?
First of all, he hardly sounds terrified. Secondly, I mean, they immediately established that it was a meteor that came down in the distance that was seen in 3 additional states, which is typical of a meteor. It's from that altitude and that light intensity that people think it's landed in their backyard, when in reality it's landed 500 miles away. Okay. And secondly, the story kept getting richer and richer and richer the more often it was told. And I'm sorry, it has hoax written all over it. And the timing as well, that they couldn't have, picked, and the very people you mentioned, George Knapp, Jeremy Corbell, I mean, they're the ones who, once again, that were, playing this up as though it was something truly, extraordinary. Well, I'm sorry, it's not.
Now, I want to show you a perspective by somebody who you, of course, know is Stephen Greer, on what's going on, because I would like your evaluation, and I'm sure you will have something to say about it. Welcome, everybody, to the Leo Zagami Show. We have a special guest today, Donald R. Schmitt, and we are discussing the Congressional hearing on UAPs.
Are they these short creatures with huge heads, big eyeballs?
There's at least 60 to 70 species that have been cataloged, the people I've worked with. So a lot of that's sort of a caricature in pop culture. There's a certain rogue element that want to create the specter of a threat from outer space. Because really what they want to do, they want to create a global totalitarian superstate where the people are united against some alien threat. And that is the big, super big picture that people need to understand. And he won't release this because I think he's been threatened, but it's a CIA document from 1985 where it describes the CIA conducting alien abductions in Brazil and Argentina on poor people in remote areas using man-made UFOs that are these anti-grav devices for psychological warfare value. If there's a group of people, and there are, who want to be able to create further global dominion, but not on a path of peace, but of endless war and conflict and control through fear, you've got to have a bigger enemy than the Taliban. So they're trying to create this mega enemy. Now it's coming to a head. There is a threat. The real threat, however, is not from the extraterrestrial ones, it's from the man-made ones.
I don't know. I mean, people, of course, here in the chat, some, of course, are for Greer, some are against. Before, of course, you take on, I give you, of course, all the time you need, because this is a very important, I think, part of today's show that we need to clarify. There has been this information, of course, that has been peddled for decades by the government on this subject, the UFOs. It's possible that they might use, of course, something to unify, because, of course, we had, I think it was at the United Nations, no, it was Ronald Reagan first talked about, even with Gorbachev, and then it was a subject that was discussed, what if we had an alien invasion? It was an hypothesis that in the last part of the Cold War kind of gained momentum. And then we had, of course, also some interesting UFO disclosure in the last part of the Soviet Union, which definitely was interesting. Something interesting happened there, definitely at the end of the Soviet Union. But here we have a guy who is pushing only on the humans controlling the whole show, without really understanding that if really we are dealing with the reverse engineering, this, everything, including the technology we're using now for this show, is a trap. It's a trap that is going to cage us in a digital gulag very soon. And I would like to know what Don Schmitt thinks about Stephen Greer. And what he said.
I can honestly say I knew Dr. Greer before he even became involved in this. He used to come to my lectures in North Carolina, where he resided at that time. Whether I lectured in Charlotte or Raleigh or Greensboro, there was always this red-haired doctor who would come up to me afterwards asking me how he could get involved in this profession. Okay, so if Dr. Greer would have stayed course in dealing with potential whistleblowers, providing them with a forum to unite and go public, I think he would have been much better off, and he would have been much more effective in at least leading up to the hearings. And the hearings may have happened many years ago as a result. How convenient that the hearings now take place when all the first-hand Roswell witnesses are deceased. How utterly convenient. So I question.
And I would like to tell all our viewers that you have interviewed in your career, as you state in this book, over 600 witnesses.
Over 600. Yes. Either directly or indirectly involved. Yeah. And down to a man, woman, and child that it did happen. Okay. So Dr. Greer would like to have it both ways, that it's through government manipulation, government interaction, that if this theory of Project Bluebeam, the idea that they would create this false flag of a alien invasion that would create one world government. We would all unite to protect the planet, so to speak. It's hardly, a new concept. But then to suggest that we have 60 to 70 species that, are all still visiting the Earth, we're not that interesting. I'm sorry. We're still trying to establish one. Let's not make it ridiculous. And so I find that these people too often, they cater to...
I have a problem with the Greer's method he devised to actually get in contact with these lights in the sky, which in the end is like inviting these interdimensional beings in a reality, with the dangers that, of course, somebody who knows about the occult, the esoteric perspective of things, he might actually stay away from certain, evocations or invocations, while instead he...
Both of us, I mean, as far as having been raised Catholic, we were often taught, whether it was Ouija boards or any type of psychic, as far as motivation or the idea that you cross that line, you don't know what side of the coin you have provoked. You don't know if it's good or evil. And as a result, the evil is what always is the most enticing, the most inviting. It's that once they got you, they'll make it seem all the more pleasurable until they spring the trap, and then it's too late. And that's where we have a much better perspective as to what looks good to the eye, what appears as far as pleasing to the senses is more times than not the very thing that you want to run from. You want to turn and get away from as soon as possible. And these people, they wave a big carrot. And the government is doing the same thing right now. Let's wave this carrot and let's see who falls for it. Let's see who, listens to us right now. See where we can take it. And I don't know about you, Leo, but what I'm personally much more concerned about than any form of alien invasion or...
But the aliens are basically here because, like I explained in my latest book, artificial intelligence will take over the planet soon.
Exactly. And that's what I am most concerned about today, more than ever, is AI. The idea that we essentially are selling our souls. We're losing our souls.
I mean, we're talking about the AI, but the AI is born after retrieving that material came from Roswell.
Yes, yes. And you want to know something? And you've heard me say this many times. I don't see any or very little technology that has risen, that has been reverse engineered from any advanced technology. We are still flying jets and we are still launching as far as rockets. We still are, using technology that has been a natural chain of progression. There's no quantum leaps. I like to say, for example, that if we did indeed acquire superior technology, extraordinary technology, that they still can't find the on button.
Well,
they can't bridge the technology.
They might have still retrieve something because some advances started to happen after
but minuscule.
But of course, because of our understanding of something that is probably in the millions of years ahead of us, and we can only grasp bits of it. But definitely, what do you think of the revelations made in the UAP special congressional hearing about reverse engineering? Because this is very important, because I have based the work of my latest book on the fact that this whole thing, of course, is orchestrated by Cyber Satan, who, of course, alien origins. Now, like you said, alien, but also interdimensional. And there was a confirmation also by David Grush about the interdimensional hypothesis. So it's not anymore, me, you, Jacques Vallée, the 70 or some other, here we're talking about some concrete military intelligence guy confirming all this. and confirming also that document that we discussed when I came to Roswell, that document from Maid Lane and the Border Science Research, and that was sent to the FBI and ended up in the FBI vault. You remember when it appeared? Yes. 2000, which of course is also connecting the world of the occult, of theosophy, with this kind of knowledge. So what do you think of reverse engineering and the statements made about reverse engineering?
Well, we always point out the fact that the government/military doesn't manufacture anything. Everything, every plane, every tank, every ship is contracted out to the private sector. And the same thing would have been if they would have acquired any.
But it's also true, for example, Don, that when Steve Jobs had to advance, in his work, and I wrote about in Volume 8, he had to go to IBM, basically to the headquarters of the bigger companies, so he could grasp, what IBM or the others were doing in some way, So he was given some access even back then, thanks to, I think, Xerox, I think the photocopy machine company. He was given some access, and suddenly he could finally develop the Apple computer with the mouse and with things that he never saw before that visit in this place. So similar visits can be orchestrated so that then private sector can advance.
Exactly. And it's one of the reasons that we have had first-hand witnesses at Boeing, at Lockheed, at Rand, at Battelle, at Los Alamos, at General Electric, all talking about their efforts to reverse engineer this technology. I mean, it's only totally conceivable that should we either have Russian technology or Nazi German technology fall into our hands, that we would attempt to reverse engineer. We would make every effort.
Now, Philip J. Corso, who was an American Army officer, always talked about this reverse engineering, though I know that maybe with Philip Corso you are not really on the same, but what do you think of his assertion? Because he was really very much affirmative from the beginning about this reverse engineering possibility from Roswell.
Yes, but we beat him to that punch because we suggested it in our book 5 years before he did. Because we were already talking to insiders who were talking about their attempts at reverse engineering the technology. My present position remains that it's still a cover-up of ignorance, that they cannot bridge the technology, that it is like Arthur C. Clarke, the famous scientist, suggested that it would be like magic to us.
Well, yes, he said basically, and I took this citation also for in Volume 9, that really magic is, technology can be indistinguishable from magic at certain levels. Basically, there is no difference at one point between one and the other. When you have, for example, the revolutionary tools of the AI these days, of quantum computers, of a human brain interface connecting with a whole grid of very powerful computers, that, of course, like I said before, though, this whole thing could be a trap. And so soon, by 2030, the aliens, or call them interdimensional beings, however you want, they have at that point control of humanity in every aspect.
We have to also consider that the very arbiters of this now 76-year cover-up are the ones that are being called on to open their files. Congress can't prove anything. The whistleblowers have nothing unless they can present, a piece of hardware or a cadaver that they can bring in as far as within a sealed vault, that type of thing. But we're relying on the Pentagon. We're relying on as far as the people who have made it their business to make sure that this never comes out. The truth never comes out about this. And Leo, we've heard for years that there's a large faction at the Pentagon that truly is terrified about this, that they do indeed believe this is supernatural, that this indeed may be even demonic, that this is something that they will never.
Yesterday, to tell you the truth, at the beginning of the hearing, when I started to view this whole thing, and then suddenly the guy cited the devil, the actual devil was in our way. I was like, well, now maybe the devil is also helping you out in bringing all this to the masses, because this is the right time. Maybe before we could have done something to stop the AI, but soon when the AI marries quantum computers, we are really looking at the Prince of Darkness here. I mean, people, I don't think, have even grasped the fact that when Joe Biden went last year to the IBM headquarters to view a quantum computer, he was, I mean, his face in front of those quantum computers. I know that the guy is not brilliant or not, but he was pretty puzzled of this. It was basically like when we had John Carpenter in his Prince of Darkness with that thing laying under a church, which was this... and it was actually a quantum physicist involved in that movie, so kind of watching into the future, no? But I mean, here we're talking about the possibility. Martin Rees, I don't know if you ever heard about Martin Rees.
Oh, yes, of course, of course.
Martin Rees published a paper at the beginning of June, and he has stated it in a very, I don't know if you have read this paper, I will advise you to go and check it out, because he talks about the fact that the aliens are in the AI now, that basically... that's where we need to search for the alien, that is basically invading our reality. And it was a really serious statement from a guy, Martin Rees, who, of course, comes from the Royal Society, from that background, which is very pragmatic. But now they are talking about this. People like him, it means like we're talking serious business here, because I take maybe him even more seriously than this whole... UAP hearing.
Well, let me throw this on the table. I'd love your opinion on this, and I've suggested this to members of the clergy over the last few years. Is it conceivable that the Antichrist would be AI? That it would be,
or the Antichrist will be aided by the AI, because in the end he will have to have this. That's why I nicknamed the AI from volume 6.66 Cyber Satan, because that's the moment Antichrist has to be, of course, rising in front of the world. He has to produce almost miracles to the world. But how is that possible? With the aid of the AI and quantum computers, that's possible.
Yes. And the fact that they are able to project things in the sky, they are able to, as far as whether with lasers or with even holographic projectors, they are able to create things that we have never witnessed before. And I think that's another reason that we're just on the precipice, that people believe that, we're witnessing the arrival, that the phenomenon is finally making itself known. Well, the skies are literally just full of UAP on a day-to-day basis. And that does not smack of alien invasion or alien presence. That smacks of something much closer to home. And how much of that is being manipulated by the government? How much of that is AI? And as a result, are we all being deceived to the point that when it finally does all come down, that we will have no defenses whatsoever?
I think that here, Don, the thing is that we always had the image of the alien invasion based on H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds.
Correct.
And it's like we made we live by that. By that hypothesis. Suddenly you have the alien craft on top of us, and the threat is visible, and we humans are like, ah! But instead, if you are a fisherman, what do? You throw the bait, and then the fish goes, and then, and that's it. And I mean, it's like throwing the bait in Roswell. flowing debate in Magenta, Italy, like we said earlier in the show, probably, possibly the first UFO crash. Now, not many people know about this, and there was the involvement of the Vatican. Isn't that the case, Don? In that, in them retrieving that object from Italy and bringing it to the U.S.
Yes, and in much respect to Roberto Panotti, who is the premier investigator on that case, I still raise questions. I still have personal doubts. I know here in the United States that many of my colleagues have dismissed that case as being a complete hoax, that the letters and some of the documents are not genuine, or are not worded appropriately. So personally, I need to look into it a little bit more.
Now, having said that, I mean, I also know Roberto for a long time, and of course, he received this material. He apparently has got at least one of the documents verified and certified to be genuine, because they have, of course, the various, the intestation of the Italy at that time was a monarchy. There was, of course, the royal whatever, and the whole thing. And then there is the timbri, as you say, the whole document. They seem actually genuine. And one of them, at least, like even, I think was it the Daily Mail who interviewed him? The Daily Mail confirmed that there was at least one document that was confirmed to be genuine. So,
and they produced some of the documents, and you mentioned the Vatican being involved, and
the Vatican, because apparently the Vatican helped retrieving, fascism, of course, for those who don't know, it ended in 1945. And if you haven't, if you haven't followed history.
Very often when I lecture and when I mention our museum in Roswell, I point out the fact that we have the second largest UFO library in the world. And then I pose the question, who has the largest? No one ever guesses correctly, but it's the Vatican.
Yeah, of course.
The Vatican has the largest UFO library in the world. And I will add, well, they had a few years head start on us. Well, how about a few centuries head start on us? So they've always been monitoring the situation for whatever the origin, for whatever.
And in particular, the Order of the Jesuits, which is a specific order within the Vatican that, of course, is in charge of the intelligence activities. So the fact that they're in charge of the astronomical sector gives it a little bit, tells you all about. So here I'm going to show the article that appeared on the Daily Mail and the documents the relative documents that were published, which I also publishing in my new book, because of course there was also this David Grush who talked about this crash within his own revelations without connecting it to Roberto Pinotti. So what do you think about that?
Though I'm concerned, because I personally believe that Grush's source on the Italian crash was Lou Elizondo. And Lou Elizondo, who formerly head of, as far as ATIP at the Pentagon, the investigation of UAPs during that time in the early 2000s. But Elizondo had met with Roberto Panotti in Italy a few years ago, and Panotti had briefed him on the crash. So then, in all likelihood, he passes that on to Grush, and Grush reports that as a crash that he has a direct witness to, so to speak. So
that is, of course, your hypothesis, because you know about this meeting that could maybe explain it. But if that is, have you asked Roberto about it?
I will be, but I want to do more from my end, from my sources, and then exchange notes with Roberto. And he's my president as far as the International Coalition on UFO, on extraterrestrial research. And we're both on the executive council. He's our president. And out of respect to Roberto, I will allow him to have the last word for the moment, but I will be looking into it further.
And of course, like I said before, if that gets confirmed, it will fit in with the whole Fermi thing, because Enrico Fermi then was asking something but knowing already the answer in a way, because at that point he was kind of doing his paradox was really a paradox, but also with a sense of humor, which is also typical of a genius like him. Now, let's move forward in analyzing a little bit more this hearing, as I want to take advantage of the fact that you are here with us. This is your latest book, yes, Don, and it's the 75th anniversary edition of Witness to Roswell. You can find also Don Schmitt during part of the year in Roswell as the curator of the Roswell Museum, and you are the organizer also of a festival. Let's call it a festival, or how you want to define it? An event?
I should clarify. I'm the lead investigator at the museum.
Okay.
And I just take it when I'm there. I'm able to do lectures, and we work as far as on updating the displays. But we're still working on the case. We're still researching. We're still tracking down families.
But then you have an event every year, you know?
Every 4th of July weekend, we commemorate the incident. We have an annual event which attracts 12 to 15,000 people. And for 3 days, it's a nonstop commemoration of the 1947 historic event.
So that's why I call it, it's almost like a festival, people dancing, partying around, dressed up as UFO, all kinds of UFO lore, but also serious speakers that, of course, delivered their talks. And this year you had probably a lot more interest, you know, because of what's happening. Isn't that the case, Don?
Yes, yes. We're still waiting for the media to come up to speed. The media is always the last ones. You are correct about News Nation, who has been leading the charge on especially the congressional hearings. But we're finding that many of the networks are still just reporting it as an aside, as an entertainment story, as though nothing will come of this come tomorrow. When in reality,
that's really strange, though. When you see a guy like Tucker Carlson being interested, he's really still the number one anchorman. Of course, he's not a Fox any longer, but he is still a guy who represents. But everybody else instead didn't take it really seriously until now, and now we're gonna see why they are starting to take it seriously, because this hearing yesterday has been really discussed, even in the media, which never discussed this kind of things. No. People in Italy, in the state media and stuff, people contacting and said, Leo, they're saying there is alien bodies. Is this possible? There's nothing new. I mean, we've been saying this for ages, you know, but for the people, it was a bit shocking.
Yeah. The first time that it has ever been suggested as far as part of any form of congressional hearings on Capitol Hill, that we are actually in possession of bodies. It's never been even suggested before. The fact that we've already advanced to that level, the point being that if you have them, present them. We need to see them once and for all. And also, these men were under oath. The fact that what they were testifying to was at the risk of perjury, should they be lying. And so I'm just amazed how the debunkers, the skeptics are now saying, well, they're fabricating, they're lying. Well, no, sorry, they were under oath.
And also another thing, Don, that I noticed, it was a bipartisan effort, really.
Exactly. It's one of the few things that
it unifies everybody.
Democrat and Republican, they're together on that. Yeah.
In that case, Ronald Reagan wasn't wrong in what he was. It kind of unifies immediately everybody. So you had, of course, the Democrats and the Republicans. It seems the Republicans, though, are the ones really that are heading this whole thing. Isn't that the case, Don?
It is the case. It is the case. And even after the hearings that it was the Republicans who went to the microphones. It wasn't the Democrats. The Democrats.
Why?
I don't know, because when you think about who was,
suddenly we were going to see people making memes of little green men behind a Democrat, like a puppet master of a Democrat. I mean, how is this possible?
When you consider that through the years, whether it was former President Jimmy Carter, who made campaign remarks regarding UFOs,
and who is still alive, by the way. I don't know.
Alive, amazingly, and former President Bill Clinton, who has made many positive statements regarding Roswell, specifically Roswell. So you're talking about two prominent Democrats. So there's a bit of a disconnect. They need to look back to their, leadership, and then realize that no, the Democrats have often been, in the forefront of.
I had almost the impression. Sorry, Don. But I had almost the impression that they want to treat the Republicans like the tinfoil hat maniacs, lunatics that just, are embracing every weirdo theory, and they are the serious ones who are, we have to be the others here,
Maybe that is their game plan, that they anticipate that this will only go so far, and then it will leave the Republicans with either egg on their face or sitting there with their tin foil hat. And the Democrats can then wash their hands of it and say, well, we never really took it seriously. So maybe that is the plan. But then you have Chuck Schumer, who...
in fact, that was something where I heard during the hearing, they even cited him because of what he said. And let's repeat what he said, Don.
Well, as I recall, the idea that not only that, as far as the idea of being a whistleblower, that you would be afforded, as far as clemency, that you would be able to testify without fear of reprisal and any form of repercussion. But the idea
because for those who have not seen the hearing yesterday, David Grush has talked about reprisal, about vindictive colleagues. Not really something. He's actually under some kind of whistleblower hearing. He couldn't discuss it too much because he actually has some kind of whistleblower, I don't know, thing that they have basically put on him like a check mark. He's basically under investigation at the moment.
Well, what all officers who have had access to any secret information, they have to sign a statement of non-disclosure.
Of course, he can't reveal certain things, but that's no. But
when you're granted immunity, and the thing is, there is a specific espionage clause within Congress that they can subpoena any individual with in the possession of secret information, secret documentation, what have you, and they can testify behind closed doors, and there can be a determination made whether their information can be declassified, can be disclosed or not.
Do you think that, though, they will go to that next stage where they will bring him in closed doors with people who have security clearance from the Congress?
They have to, because Grush kept alluding to that he kept answering that he could not answer as far as openly about what he has seen or who his sources were. So yes, by all means, they have to have him testify behind closed doors and then make a determination whether that information can go public or not.
Let's see some of the key moments of this hearing so we can comment them together before, of course, we conclude the show.
That was intriguing to me because my view has been that we are billions of light years away from any other system. And the concept that an alien species that's technologically advanced enough to travel billions of light years gets here and somehow is incompetent enough to not survive Earth or crashes is something that I find a little bit far-fetched. And with that being said, you have mentioned that there's interdimensional potential. Could you expound on that?
Yeah, to answer your first question, and I'm here as a fact witness and expert, but I will give you a theoretical framework, at least to work off, to kind of espouse crashes, regardless of your level of sentience, right? Planes crash, cars crash, n number of sorties, however high, a small percentage are going to end in mission failure, if you will, as we say in the Air Force. And then in terms of multidimensionality, that kind of thing, the framework that I'm familiar with, for example, is something called the holographic principle. It derives itself from general relativity and quantum mechanics, and that is, if you want to imagine a 3D object such as yourself casting a shadow onto a 2D surface, that's the holographic principle. So you can be projected, quasi-projected from higher dimensional space to lower dimensional. It's a scientific trope that you can actually cross, literally, as far as I understand, but there's probably guys with PhDs that we could probably argue about that.
Don, what is he trying to say here?
Well, I appreciate the fact, and without him having actually said it, we're not talking about an infallible God. We're not talking about something that would, exhibit total perfection. That things crash, things have mishaps. The idea that one of the congressmen, well, I can't believe something that could grapple, and
like they're infallible, I mean, it can happen.
Again, that's a weak, silly argument. There's no basis in fact. At the point being, whatever crashed, it crashed. I can't help that. I can't address why and what the as far as motivation was behind that fact. Sorry, but the idea that he brought up as far as interdimension, and that's where we are citing. That's where we are going more and more. The idea that we're dealing with something. We're dealing with a phenomenon that is able to come from a fourth, a fifth, a sixth dimension.
But we also know that we can connect different parts of the universe through black holes that can bring us also into the multidimensional hypothesis, but also bring us at the same time into the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So one doesn't really necessarily always, because some people say, no, it's only like this or it's only like that. What do you think? Is it possible that it's both?
Well, and let's also, I always remind people that we bring the church, we bring the Vatican back into the picture. That in the summer of 1947, that after that, a whole wave of sightings. And as you and I, we've discussed before, that I am convinced that one of the first people that then President Harry Truman would have called would have been the Pope, would have been Pope Pius. I believe it's Pope Pius XIII, correct?
Well, at that time, yes.
At that time. And the point being, he would have asked, what does the church know about this? What can the church tell me about this? That type of thing. Okay. And so it was that summer. It was weeks thereafter that the Vatican put out that statement, which read, it was the position of the church, the universe is most likely teeming with other creations. Okay, fine. And then you had Pope Benedict, when he was asked, what would the church's reaction be upon aliens arriving on planet Earth? And he responded, we would baptize them. So the church has always had this very open arm approach.
And then, of course, we get to the last few years where you have a whole Jesuit approach, which is like, let's baptize the aliens, let's prepare for the aliens, let's...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
so, I mean, there is definitely, we go back to that first UFO crash in Italy, which apparently then the Vatican, from the hypothesis, I mean, that has been put forward by Pinotti, is collaborating with the Americans to retrieve this whole thing. So the Vatican, with a direct interest almost into a UFO crash, an involvement almost, I mean, it's quite incredible, now, this whole thing.
And yet, Roswell would happen, 14 years later, and yet all the people who were involved, they behaved as though it was the first time. It wasn't like they were able to revert back to anything gleaned from the 33 crash. See, that's what I'm investigating now. I'm trying to discover if there was any link, if there was anything learned previous to Roswell, because for all the hundreds of interviews I've done, for everyone that I've talked to, they behaved as though this was an unprecedented incident. nothing like it before. It wasn't like they could go to a manual and, oh, this is how they behaved, this is how they reacted in experiences before 1947. That's what I'm trying to plug in at the moment. That's where I'm going to rely on Roberto to try to show me what was learned by a possible 33 incident.
Well, from my experience within the Italian Freemasonry intelligence services and whatnot, which I had contact with, I remember they always used to talk about a ray of death,
yes.
a laser that was kind of created at the time of the fascists, and that in some way might have been connected with this whole UFO crash. I mean, this is, of course.
I had the late Chester Lido, who was part of the Manhattan Project, and he was very instrumental in developing the detonator, the radio detonator for the actual bomb, because it's not an impact explosion, it's a midair, it's a radio detonation that creates that wall of destruction that rains down. They realized that they'd have much greater destruction from an aerial burst as opposed to a ground impact where the ground would absorb much of the energy. So Lido always would describe to us that they were already experimenting with lasers during the war. That laser technology was in its infancy, but nonetheless, they were already experimenting with a high energy burst of light energy and the effects it was having on aircraft, the effects it was having on navigation, the effects it was having on materials. And so, again, just because we don't learn of something until years later, it doesn't mean that they haven't been working on it for years and even decades before.
Yeah, no, but also there was a war, there was after, a world war in 1939, there were events. I mean, there was a situation also that was very different from now. I mean, you couldn't really communicate just by a blink of the eye like we do today. Information went through much slower means, let's say, telegrams and whatnot will take a lot more time. So I think that definitely when it comes down to Roswell, you, of course, have interviewed many people in all this, and I go back to the reverse engineering hypothesis. Once this UFO gets put on a train, because that's what you're basically saying in the book, where does it go?
Well, only some pieces were loaded onto a freight car.
Okay.
Much of it was loaded into aircraft, including B-29s, C-47s, the available aircraft at that time. But it all wound up at Foreign Technology Division at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. Again, predecessor to Area 51. And the Foreign Technology Division, if they recovered any Nazi technology, if they recovered so much as a Russian MiG, that's where they always went for analysis and attempts at reverse engineering. Let's see what makes this either superior, if there's anything that we can advance our own aircraft by studying our adversaries. And so that's where...
So here we go. Of course, because we today in this 90 minutes we are dedicated to this subject, today we have really discussed a lot of things, and I think we really synthesized the best of the whole UAP UFO phenomenon and what really the attention that yesterday finally the Congressional hearing gave to it. In all this, we have figures that are at times ambiguous. Now, Bob Lazar, it's one of these figures, and because yesterday, of course, there was Knapp there, and he was very much involved with Bob Lazar. What do you think of Bob Lazar?
I always compare, I equate the likes of a Bob Lazar to an Edward Snowden, who whether you consider him a hero or a traitor, when you're a true whistleblower, at least up till now, you had to flee the country. If you were divulging actual secret information, you had to seek asylum. And who would have ever thought it would have been Russia, of all places, in the case of Snowden? Juxtaposed to a Bob Lazar, who's been able to freely speak for now 35 years about what he claims he saw at Area 51, at S4, Groom Lake. And no one has ever stopped him. No one has ever threatened him.
No, that's very important what you said, and that's why I want to immediately connect it with what happened instead not so long ago near Area 51 with an enthusiast, a blogger who used to publish pictures of near Area 51, whatever he managed to get, and suddenly he was raided. Both his place near Area 51 and in Las Vegas were raided. We never heard what happened after with that guy, but definitely he wasn't treated with the white gloves like Lazar.
No, Lazar, in many cases, was like a useful idiot, to use that term, that they used him to spread either disinformation or misinformation. And he was very helpful in that regard, because he was able to freely do it, whether it was Snowden or the employee at 51 who you just cited. Yes, we don't even know what became of him, because they raided his place and they essentially recovered things that he was not supposed to have. So that's the difference, and that's where I have a lot of misgivings about Bob Lazar.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up. And of course, we are going towards the end of the show, but still I would like to focus on a couple of more interventions from the hearing. We are here, of course, with an expert like Donald Schmitt for the Leo Zagami show. We are viewing what has been an historical moment, this hearing. Now, before we go back into the hearing, though, Don, what do you think? Was it really, truly historical, what happened yesterday?
It was historic in the sense that it's the first time that they have actually discussed physical evidence, that it's beyond anything heretofore where they spoke merely of sightings, where they spoke of just eyewitness testimony. They're now focusing in, if they finally are true to form, if they follow up and follow the breadcrumbs, that they seek out the physical evidence, and that's where we will hold them to the fire. That's why we are meeting with the congressman involved, because we just can't let them back off of the fact that, okay, you have asked about bodies, you have asked about reverse engineering. We're beyond lights in the sky. We're beyond pilot and witness sightings. We have to now, where are you holding the evidence?
Let's see it here.
We see and
Today,
witness
I would like
it
to highlight
ourselves
three critical issues that demand our action.
That's what we have to hold them to.
Let's hear what they've been saying about
UAP
it.
are in our airspace, but they are grossly underreported. These sightings are not rare or isolated, they are routine. Military aircrew and commercial pilots, trained observers whose lives depend on accurate identification, are frequently witnessing these phenomena.
This is one of the pilots, Don, who has testified and, of course, talks about these encounters being like, something that happens almost every day, basically, actually every day. This is quite incredible. And then there is other moments like this one, for example, which I find interesting. We can also, I would like to know your opinion on this.
It actually makes me very upset as a leader to see that happen to other coworkers and actually superiors of mine over the last 3 years.
How do you account?
You see, here we go into that question that we discussed earlier, actually, without even watching the video. We touched on the fact that the reprisal against these whistleblowers. Right. But here, there will be a lot of skepticism from people about this hearing. You understand that now we're going to be broadcasting this, and a lot of people are going to view it, and everybody's going to turn out having their own opinion. Now, there is a lot of people that talks about the so-called Blue Beam Project. And I always told these people, listen, the Blue Beam Project was an invention of a very creative journalist who just picked up this whole hypothesis and made it into a big thing. And then, of course, you know, it's a possibility. You can manipulate people using modern technology. And we just discussed the possibility with the AI. But it's actually not of a human nature what we are seeing, because if we are trapped by this digital gulag, in the end, though, these interdimensional beings, call them Satan and his legion, call them however you want, they have actually managed to do what they claimed they would do.
We have to also be careful, Leo. Just imagine, what if indeed in 1933, what if indeed in 1947, there was a recovery of an extraterrestrial nature, of something that was beyond our comprehension, and to the best of their ability, they could not reverse engineer any of the technology, and as a result, they've had to essentially bury it. They've had to keep it under wraps for all these decades, because it's like magic. It's like supernatural. It's something beyond our comprehension. And what should now rise to the fore is AI. That this all gets explained the way, once again, very conveniently, that whether it's Space Force or whether it's our technology or Russian or Chinese, and what's get buried in the noise is the fact that, yeah, but we had the real thing. But because we can't divulge it, because we can't acknowledge it, we have to, you know, create another distraction. We have to create something that people will accept, and something that we once again can confuse and distract people in accepting. And what a tragedy that there would be something that truly could unite us, except, you know, acknowledging that there is something above us. It's not God, but at least it's something showing that there is an intelligence beyond us. And they were able to get here, whether interdimensionally or through a wormhole or a black hole or what have you. Nonetheless, it demonstrates that we're not the king of the universe, that there is something beyond us. And how sad that, once again, the powers that be can manipulate people into thinking that it's still only human nature to accept that we're being visited, when in reality it's just science, it's just us, it's just secular humanism, that we're still, you know, the kings of our
definitely, I must say that if this proves to be, I mean, if it then, you know, it's completely genuine, I doubt that they will spread it, because in the end, it actually damages the age of enlightenment, the age of the Illuminati, the age of reason. We go back suddenly into times of, you know, uncertainty, magical forces that are unknown to mankind, the gods. It's basically like they want to maybe avoid this whole thing simply because they want to avoid us. It's like a leap into the past. They are bringing us, you know, into the age of the gods, at the time of the pharaohs almost, because at that point, we are in front of a technology that we, of course, can't understand or grasp. And if by any chance they have used this technology already by using reverse engineering, is still, I think, the topic of probably of most importance that was discussed yesterday during the hearing. Don't you agree, Don?
Yes, yes. And to them, to the powers that be, it always comes back to control. Anything that they can use, that they can manipulate, that they can use as far as in controlling the masses, unless we also forget that with the military, with the Pentagon, it always comes back to the military application. Everything and any advancement, whether human or alien, they will strive to generate a military application of that technology. How they can increase as far as the size of their own aircraft, their ships, their tanks, whatever they can use to make them the king pin on the block, so to speak. That if they can reverse engineer the technology beyond our own.
But I mean, they might fall into a trap, because here we're dealing with the races that are probably much more advanced, and so even the finding, we were discussing the fact that there was a crash, of course, in Roswell, but what if that whole crash will be used at their advantage? These entities, these interdimensional beings, call them however you want, might have also a very different understanding of the space-time continuum. And yes, of course, that puts us always in a very difficult position. Then, you have this technology, you are using it, but you are constructing a prison that is becoming more and more visible. We discussed this since the beginning of the show. The world is not becoming a better place because of this technology.
No, exactly. In other words, they may have long anticipated our immature, our childish behavior, in that we always point out what's the predominant theme you're monitoring as far as our daily radio and television broadcast. What's the predominant theme that comes across 24 hours a day from this planet? That we are a barbaric, childish species, race of individuals whose primary preoccupation is tribal warfare. That's all we do. We don't get along within our own country. We don't get along within our own world. We don't get along within our own families. And as a result, they would chance their technology falling into our hands, and the idea that we would use it to create bigger spears, bigger and sharper spears. And so you're absolutely correct, Leo, that it may have been intended to backfire, that we would use it and we would find ourselves even being...
And in the end, though, Don, as Catholics, as Christians, we know that we were promised, though, to overcome all this, because, yes, they might propose us the mark of the beast, but it's up to us to renounce to that kind of thing and to, of course, behave in the correct way on the side of God rather than the side of cyber Satan. So that's why we have to be very careful with marrying this whole technology which is pushed to us every day from Silicon Valley, from the libtards and from the woke ideology also, that comes from a world that, of course, is probably manipulated behind the scenes in a way that in the end we are digging our own grave here. It's like
that beautiful painting, that illustration of the arm wrestling match between Jesus Christ and Satan the devil. And the devil is struggling. I mean, he's sweating. I mean, he's got a look on his face like he knows what's about to happen. And Jesus has a very slight smile on his face because he has no doubt of what is about to happen. And so it's
so know the truth. The truth should set you really free, and not in some kind of prison planet. Thank you so much, Don, for being with us today. It was a really special episode. I think a lot of people would benefit from viewing our analysis of yesterday's hearing, especially your analysis as an expert. And thank you so much. What will you like to say at the end of this show?
Well, do your homework. Realize who the players are, and study those who we choose to listen to, because very often, as has been in the case throughout history, there have been the charlatans, the people that they sell a good story, but it turns out to be the wrong story. It's not the side we want to be on. Choose choose your leaders appropriately, because throughout history, God has chosen flawed people to lead, and very often they become great people. So we need to be very wary of our government, of our leaders, and as a result, especially when it comes to the subject of UAPs, UFOs, the truth is all that matters.
And read this book, guys, because it's a really good book, as well, of course, as my latest book that is coming out now. I'm going to show you also the cover, because here I would like to show you a couple of things here. You know, it's like we are discussing the following subject in 7 steps. 7 steps to the secrets of the New World Disorder, from transhumanism and immortality to Gnostic Jesus, UFOs, and insect witchcraft. And of course, you can see the symbology, which is pretty clear here. Of course, we are showing, this cover with a lot of details. It's very detailed in the symbology, but in the end, is very clear also that those forces also that unfortunately tried to sabotage Christianity, that so-called Gnostic Christianity. Thanks God we had the fathers of the church that stopped that heresy, but it never really stopped, because then it kept on in the mystery schools of what then later became the certain branches of the Freemasonry, of the Illuminati, and so on. And so the Gnostics are really a curse, because they say they are striving for knowledge, but in reality they are elitarian, and they think they are the only ones who need to know this knowledge. They have to keep it for a limited amount of people, when instead here today, I hope that with Don Schmitt and with Leo Zagami, we have offered all of you the possibility of understanding really what the UFO hearing was all about, and also the importance of the Roswell crash, which is basically the holy grail of ufology. Thank you so much. God bless you, Don, for your great work, and I hope to see you soon again here on the Leo Zagami Show.
Same to you, Leo. God bless you as well, and keep up all your wonderful work. I look forward to reading your next book.
It will be sent immediately as soon as it's into press. Then the end of the week, you're going to have it by next week, because I would love your opinion.
Wonderful. Look forward to that. Thank you, Leo.
Thank you, Don.